The male protagonist faced harassment throughout his youth for being unable to harness magic. Even his girlfriend discarded him for another man without a moment's hesitation. In the course of a single harassment episode, he delivered the simplest strike and rendered his tormentor unconscious. All those in attendance were completely astonished. It appears that during his sorcery initiation ceremony, he astonished the foremost archmages of the continent. He roused enigmatic substance, the ultimate terror dreaded globally. Moreover, he relentlessly honed his physique, elevating both his arcane and corporeal damage to premier levels. No one imagines that such strength originated from a decade-old child, which granted him a focused assignment within the Academy's distinguished cohort, elevating him to the status of a prodigy among prodigies. The young lad was raised on the landmass of Ethan, governed by the sacred Imperial Confederation, revering the lunar deity, Alusha, as the ultimate divine. However, beneath the tranquility, age-old lineage myths persisted at remote borders, and the lad appeared bound to that overlooked mystery. On his birthday, his mother unexpectedly proposed to instruct him in celestial techniques. He could hardly conceal his enthusiasm. With that strength, he would no longer be harassed while pursuing game. However, she promptly cautioned him that mastering celestial skills was far from a simple endeavor. The entirety possessed, erected numerous obstacles purporting to thwart malevolence, yet in truth, amassing dominion. The initial prerequisite was comprehending the complete significance of the archaic tongue, employed as a safeguarding mechanism. She abruptly uttered peculiar sounds, concluding with the assertion that strength is a privilege reserved for the genuinely formidable. Astonishingly, the lad instinctively responded in the identical language. Moreover, his reply left her even more astonished. Genuine power resides in knowledge, rendering her utterly speechless. He merely indicated a weathered, dusty tome, claiming that he acquired his knowledge from it. Her gaze transformed, a blend of elation and skepticism, as she settled in to disclose the reality. The tome served as the sacred text of the deity Alusha, encompassing 7 celestial disciplines written in the archaic tongue. The lad was perplexed, as he previously failed to grasp it, so why now? Since he had traversed the initial threshold, solely those recognized by the deity were able to comprehend. In other terms, he had been selected. On that very evening, the most significant ceremony commenced, as his birthday present transformed into an entrance to the goddess's palace. Whereas destiny would transform eternally. Shortly after the ceremony commenced, a soft voice inquired whether he yearned for strength. He responded sincerely without delay, paving the way for the subsequent phase. The atmosphere transformed as celestial sculptures emerged. This marked the resurgence of the sacred arts. Before him stretched routes of restoration and retribution, protection, prediction, and an enigmatic 7th alternative yet to be specified. Oddly, there were more options than usual, yet he had no opportunity to reflect. He merely desired to become robust enough to safeguard his sole parent. He selected. The voice appeared to concur, until an irregularity redirected his fated strength in the direction of a 7th figure, surpassing the 6 that represent the shadowy aspect of the lunar surface. The globe calls for equilibrium, and any surplus strength necessitates a corresponding cost. As the ceremony progressed, his mother observed in dread, as obscurity contorted his visage into an eerie, phantom-like being. In that moment, Richard's authentic identity emerged. Before him loomed a shadowy silhouette beneath a gigantic moon, as he drifted through an infinite abyss without purpose. A murky voice murmured his name, freezing the atmosphere to the core. In truth, Alani became frantic and called out for her child. Before she could complete her statement, she crumpled, shaking from agony and incredulity at the unfolding events. In the midst of the turmoil, she recognized that this was a gift of deception. Alana's visage became frigid as she advanced boldly. Electricity sparked in her hand as her strength returned. She infused all her enchantment into a shaping celestial masterpiece, trepidation supplanted by unwavering determination. The malevolent life energy was aggressively amassed, catapulted towards the moon, yet the frigid tone verified the existence of a being from the shadows, Richard. Upon hearing that, Alani became immobilized as a piercing migraine assaulted her. Abruptly, all noise ceased, giving way to an even more disquieting tranquility. She took a deep breath, now convinced that the turmoil had reached the territory of the moon goddess. Richard remained in a state of unconsciousness, but his state had become more perilous than before. Recollections of the enchanted realm emerged, shadowy beings traversing innumerable dimensions. They incessantly intruded, tainting all that they came into contact with. In the distant past, the land of Ethan had endured their grasp. They consumed existence and enchantment, distorting thoughts with trickery, transforming devotees into instruments of disorder. A period suffocated in gore until the sacred coalition and the lunar deity drove them back. However, even Alusha now appeared corrupted. Alani's destiny had turned into a symbol for encroachment, akin to a beacon steering shadows to safety. If this persisted, he would either be shattered by conflicting forces or held captive by the most formidable malevolent entity, dooming himself for eternity. The moonlight glimmered chillingly longingly as Alani contemplated whether this was the retribution of Alusha. If she remained a chief priestess, had the ceremony not deviated, none of this would have transpired. However, remorse was futile. She refused to allow her son to be consumed. Alani desperately scoured the space for something, anything at all. Finally, she forcefully pulled open a drawer and discovered what she was seeking. A time-worn, weather-beaten correspondence that erupted with enchantment the instant she unsealed it. The worn phrases radiated as though recently inscribed. Beyond, illumination burst forth in harmony with the name engraved, a title that influenced global regulations and was conveyed elsewhere. Alani rose to her feet, now more composed as she realized he had perceived. Her recollections resurfaced from a decade past, enveloped in haze and chase. A recognizable voice implored her to survive while he fended off the adversary. She declined to abandon him. However, Gordon maintained that there was no time available and instructed her to tend to their offspring. He proclaimed that their offspring possessed the cursed lineage of House Achamuner and ought to bear the name Gordon Isaiah Satan Astoria Achamuner, and to elevate him into a genuine individual. As illumination burst forth, Gordon gazed skyward, requesting to harness that strength. Returning to the current moment, Alani clenched her jaw, a decade of concealment now rendered perilous. Without faltering, she invoked her power as a high priestess and ordered the shadows to recede. Radiance swiftly bathed the entire structure, dispelling any remaining peril. Alani embraced Richard fervently, her quivering voice brimming with gratitude as he at last regained consciousness. The lad trudged along with a pounding headache, reminiscing about a bright moon when Alani softly reassured him that all was well. However, Richard abruptly gazed at her in astonishment. Alani beamed gently, declaring that this was her authentic self. Richard gradually recalled selecting sagacity and perceiving the statue of the seventh deity before all became indistinct. He remembered being pulled into an oppressive, frigid void. There, the moon uttered a solitary phrase, expressing it as the dual aspects of the moon. He acquired insight into the reality that lay beneath. Alani halted at the term truth, unprecedented in any rite of awakening. She murmured to herself, attempting to assemble the fragments. Before she could ponder any further, Richard's voice drew her attention once more. He expressed that he now observed more distinctly, felt more robust, and discerned further. As though the shroud of the world had been removed, Alani experienced a tumultuous wave within her, remembering the foretelling regarding the offspring of the Achamuner lineage. She restrained it and softly conveyed to him that being secure was sufficient. Then she mentioned that there was something significant to share with him. At the age of 10, he was entitled to be informed. Richard's demeanor lifted, believing it was yet another birthday revelation. Alani nodded in disapproval. It pertained to his progenitor. Her grin quivered as she inquired if he wished to encounter him. Richard was perplexed, believing his father to be another individual. Alani ultimately admitted she had concealed the reality for a decade. Her biological father was still living. She was convinced that he would encounter him shortly, as a messenger from his father was expected to arrive. After a brief moment, Richard composedly inquired if she desired to meet his father. Taken aback, Alani faltered, yet Richard smiled resolutely, indicating that if she wished for it, he was willing as well. His steadfast stare penetrated her soul. With tears in her eyes, she expressed her gratitude to her son. Nevertheless, Gordon's likeness re-emerged in her thoughts, and a chilling notion crept in, suggesting that her period of safeguarding him might be drawing to a close. Several days later, amidst a tranquil grain field, a youthful individual glanced upward, perceiving that something was amiss. His associate inquired whether anyone had arrived in the village. His expression soured immediately. Heavily fortified warriors were advancing in formation. Inhabitants were alarmed by the presence of the heavy cavalry. A man advanced, exuding a chilling dominance, imperatively seeking explanations. His blade gradually ascended, shining brilliantly. With a lethal determination, he inquired about Alani's whereabouts. Pandemonium ensued as the inhabitants fled in terror. Vuru collapsed to the earth, faltering as he claimed he was unfamiliar with any Alani. Others reiterated their lack of knowledge, asserting that no such individual resided there. However, a soldier asserted that the command signal originated from this village. Mordard's glance shifted. He propelled his steed ahead, devoid of feeling, proclaiming that, should that be the case, they would obliterate the entire location. In that charged instant, a voice called out to halt. Alani advanced. Composed and steadfast, she confronted them and proclaimed her presence. The inhabitants of the village inhaled sharply in astonishment. A soldier commanded her to remain motionless and refrain from moving. Mordard lifts a hand, his tone subdued yet resolute. Incivility is unacceptable. He brings his steed to a stop, dismounts, inclines his head courteously, and presents himself as Medel, devoted knight of G.P. Duor. Upon learning that they have arrived under G.P. Duor's directive to bring her back, Illy becomes motionless while Medel coolly verifies it. Inhabitants are filled with anxiety and chatter as they rush over, speculating on the actions of an Elan and the unexpected arrival of the cavalry. Beale navigates through the tumultuous throng, eager for a glimpse. An individual individual abruptly shouts for everyone to pay attention to her. The atmosphere becomes frigid as everyone comprehends in dread that Alani is Anne. Unperturbed, Elan remarks calmly that she is not the individual they genuinely sought. She presents Elchade to Medel, who inclines his head and vows allegiance to the youth. The throng erupts once more, knights inclining their heads to a young one and referring to Elan as an elf. Who are these individuals? PL stands in disbelief, absorbing the chaos. Medel inquires whether they are prepared to set off, observing that G-Dinge is keenly anticipating. Ale affirms with a nod, as Kay gently pulls her sleeve, softly uttering "Mom," and Lenny comforts him softly, assuring him they mean no harm. They are merely going to meet his father. Large and diminutive hands clasp firmly, burdened with unexpressed emotions. Gradually, they release their grip, embarking on a fresh adventure. Troops yell at the inhabitants to scatter and prohibit anyone from departing. Meal emotionlessly includes until they disappear. He casts a brief look at El, quietly evaluating him as GD. Lineage of the Archimond bloodline. A subordinate bursts in anxiously, conveying a crisis. Medel scowls. The man swallows hard as they've lost track of Madame Medel, who looks faint. She came back for a purpose, encountered an unusual breeze, and disappeared without a sign. Prior to their response, a petrified shrieker ignites the village in flames. Turmoil erupts within the flaming residence of Alanis. A warrior shouts as the lady hurried home and ignited herself in flames. Elchade's universe descends into shadow. Medel has pivoted abruptly towards him, yet Elchade has already jumped down, calling out for his mother. Medel halts him before he can dash into the fire. Elchade flails about, exclaiming that this was not her intention. His frantic screams pierce the atmosphere as he battles to escape. Medel states icily that this was her decision. Before them, the fire engulfs the dwelling as if it were devouring existence itself. An unadulterated, bold decision to safeguard what is most valuable regardless of the expense. Medel quietly regards her as deserving of GDA, wishing that the young man will not squander their offering. Recollections surge forth of Elani, softly expressing that they would soon depart from the hamlet of his origin. At that time, Elchade couldn't comprehend why she chose to disclose that his father was alive only after he turned 10. Elan clarified that her error jeopardized him, and only his father had the ability to rectify it. When he inquired about their romantic tale, Elan grinned and remarked that entangled circumstances compelled her to escape, alter identities, and conceal herself. Following a ceremony that revealed her genuine nature, she confessed that she was an elf, struggling to uphold this truth for 2 weeks as her condition deteriorated. Upon hearing that Elchade's gaze deepened, she felt unwell. She acquiesced gently. Perhaps one of them needed to be relinquished. Before he could comprehend it, Ayalani caressed his head, urging him to rely on his father and depart in pursuit of a remedy. Elchade argues that he wishes to remain with his mother, but Elan softly asserts that it is entirely for his benefit. She squeezes his cheek while he attempts to protest, his words faltering and trailing off. Ellen's look became more tender than ever as she urged him to hold onto the memory. Regardless of his destination, she will forever accompany him. Returning to the present, Elchade remains insensible on a mound of hay. Medel commands the carriage to proceed, while the boy is kept under watch as his men comply. When inquired about eliminating GDA's offspring, Medel expresses that it was the sole option available at the time and is subsequently probed regarding the village. Medel composedly instructs a few women to be spared in order to disseminate the information regarding the madam's demise. His gaze shifts to ICGD-ing once no one is aware of the child's location. The order descends mercilessly, encircle the settlement, and eliminate everyone. In slumber, Elchade's voice reverberates, "Mother, what is father like?" Elan once grinned, remarking that his father was an exceptional intellect in military tactics and governance. A decade prior, endowed with a singular ability, he observes the elven royal court within the woodland of everlasting darkness, perturbing the sacred coalition. However, she has reportedly lost communication. Rumors suggest he has attained the title of Marquis at Black Rose Castle. Upon a bed, Elchade reclines with cheeks marked by tears, softly weeping. He startles to consciousness, calling out for his mother. Propped up and massaging his forehead, he contemplates his surroundings. His gaze wanders to the flickering fireplace, evoking reminiscences. The recollection of that evening immobilized him. The moment of clarity struck, causing his hand to come to a standstill in midair. He springs off the mattress in search of his mother. Elchade anxiously scours the chamber in distress. A rap reverberates from beyond. Who is it? The door squeaks ajar, and a girl glances in, realizing he is awake, and he stares vacantly, inquiring who she is. She gently highlights his attire and advises him to change following his shower. Gazing upon his exposed form, Elchade flushes deeply. Embracing himself, he stammers as she bows her head, indicating that clean garments are available and the restroom is positioned to the right. "Clean yourself up first. The Lord wishes to see you." Elchade tenses at the term sovereign. He gradually enters an expansive chamber. His petite silhouette appears completely adrift in the expanse expanse. Pulling at his collar, he murmurs about how vast it is. The glow of candlelight dances warmly yet weightily. Leisurely strides resonate down the staircase. Elchade scowls and gazes upward. A gentleman rests against the banister. His tone subdued, he utters, "At last, we encounter each other." His keen gaze refers to him as Elchab by Kim and Degay. Then mellow my essence. The candlelight flickers softly by the window, the stillness overwhelming. GD&G dines with deliberate, measured grace, carving the steak as a master who governs all. Across from him, Elchade consumes his food with abandon, infusing every mouthful with fervor. GD&G serenely observes that existence ebbs and flows, yet never neglects to savor delectable cuisine, a sentiment Eileen once expressed that the lad seems to have inherited. Upon hearing her name, Elchade halts, rendering the meat insipid. He forcefully thrusts his fork onto the table as Gay remains unperturbed, stating that Eileen offered herself to safeguard them both. She concealed his identity from other forces, so he must comprehend this. Elchade, Kim, and Degay. With my head bowed before her, I am known as Elchade GD&G. Jideng promptly dismisses it. Eileen never referred to him by that name, yet he continues to carry the identities of Kim and Degay. Regardless of her previous statements, his lineage is tied to the Ankyu Mand clan. His tone grows frigid, declaring that blood belongs to the Sacred Alliance Empire. Their lineage ought to be regarded as Grand Duke, surpassing even the present Duke. However, history tarnished their lineage, inciting animosity from opposing forces. They transformed into prickles, and dignified gazes were categorized as rough and disorderly. However, those identical aristocrats revere a different individual, an individual who consumes uncooked meat taken from a living organism less than an hour prior to the meal. He is referred to as Philip the Bloodthirsty, yet paradoxically, he serves as the emblem of nobility. Indeed, there is a rationale for that. Would you like to take a guess? Because he is undoubtedly the finest sovereign this realm has ever known. A despot wielding total military authority, mercilessly bloodthirsty and exceedingly capricious, compelling every noble to submit. Richard's eyes expand. This individual governed the entire realm. Jideng grins slyly as the Archimonde family is branded as unhinged and perilous. Thus, if you possess this blood, you must inevitably become more formidable, acquire greater strength than anyone else. Is that the reason you and Mother dedicated yourselves to challenging the sovereigns? Jideng dismissively turns away and reiterates challenge. With his hands in his pockets, he casts a sidelong look at Richard. He categorically declines to be manipulated by ineptitude. At merely 10 years old, you perceive the world as uncomplicated. Upon discovering the truth, you might realize that even those nearest to you can be just as ruthless as that bloodthirsty ruler. A lady arrives at the entrance, informing Lord Gordon that an operative dispatched by rival aristocrats was apprehended within the domain. Gordon inquires of Eiley what time it is, to which she responds that it pertains to a collective of more than 100 civilians. Gordon commands without doubt to eradicate them all, regardless of their condition. The lady inclines her head. Gordon states that she is Richard's half-sibling and henceforth she will manage the affairs of the castle, to which she reluctantly consents. Richard abruptly strikes the table and rises to his feet, confronting his half-sibling. He strides furiously towards Gordon, insisting on understanding what his mother signified to him. Gordon averts his eyes, icy. The stranger holds no meaning to him anymore. Richard halts, causing the students to shrink back, and emits a parched chuckle. Gordon clarifies that Alian's final plea was to assign Richard to his care, although realizing her desire will prove challenging, and he is disinclined to assist. Even if she bestowed you upon me, I desired you outright or conferred upon you any authority. As you remain here, you will depend on your own abilities to grasp the opportunities I permit. As Richard remembers Alian beaming and expressing that she still cherished his father and wished he would as well. Yet, at this moment, Richard fights back tears and shakes as he proclaims his disdain for him, who have come to a sudden stop, with dust swirling all around. Mordred leans in on the steed, murmuring that they are nearly there. 2 days later, Richard confronts the immense azure enchanted spire, where Lord Gordon orchestrated his instruction. He remains astonished as Mordred informs him that his instructor is awaiting him indoors. Before him lies an ethereal metropolis, illuminated by enchanting azure radiance and shimmering structures. He descends, gazing skyward in astonishment. Thus, this is the mythical sorcery metropolis. His gaze follows each peak. Every sorcerer and pupil that strolls by possesses a unique mystical presence. Richard exclaims in astonishment that such marvels were found solely in Alian's literature, while Mordred requests a former associate to instruct the young master diligently. The man sneers at the outstanding resources from the Archimonde Marquis, yet consents to instruct, recognizing the youth's true identity. From a distance, he evaluates Richard and concedes that the youth's enchanting aptitude is remarkable. However, he cautions that he will not impart knowledge without compensation, despite numerous prodigies pleading for his mentorship. Even individuals possessing celestial power have been declined, as an initial assessment of resilience is required. In the realm of sorcery, not everyone possesses the ability to master incantations. Only individuals with unique constitutions or the appropriate lineage can harness such power. Therefore, meticulous evaluation and classification take precedence. In the Azure Metropolis, the prestigious spring examination assesses skills, and Mina instructs everyone to form a queue for assessment. Tension escalates as contenders advance, and one pupil rushes out, unable to bear the pressure. 76 evaluator ratings merely reflect novice proficiency in white mana, and the audience derides yet another affluent individual lacking genuine skill. Mordred kneels beside Richard, clarifying that he merely needs to step into the spring's mana zone and withstand a moment. As the 77th name is announced, the audience jeers at the simply attired youth who appears considerably more youthful. Richard advances towards the ascending spring as the command instructs him to stay within the evaluation area. The instant the energy makes contact with him, agony erupts as though something is penetrating his physique. Mordred cries out for him to persevere and not let Gordon down. The phrases prompt Richard to grasp his own opportunities. He clenches his jaw, his gaze intense. There's no way he will be underestimated. After more than 10 minutes elapse, the audience transitions from ridiculing to astonished. Mina lifts the assessment sphere and declares yellow mana at an elevated level. Prior to any response, a sudden explosion of dark energy manifests. Richard's eyes expand, pupils constricting. A hazy fortress flickers within his thoughts. The torment intensifies, and his cry plunges the surroundings into turmoil. The assembly erupts in panic at the mysterious dark energy as sirens sound alerts of peril, perplexing every sorcerer in attendance. Mordred wanes, as it is an ominous being. He reminisces about Ellie, stating that she had no alternative but to pursue Gordon's assistance, regardless of the honorable upheaval it would instigate. She had implored Mordred to shield Richard. Mordred had bowed and vowed with his existence to protect him. In the realm of actuality, he leaps at Richard, yet a dazzling golden radiance obstructs his path. He perceives that the ominous force is exceedingly potent for his mortal form to confront. Mino desperately seeks assistance as the tiered spring becomes unstable. A shaft of light cascades from above, commanding all to retreat. Mordred gazes in astonishment at a mythical sorcerer who has manifested. Suhelen descends and promptly binds Richard with enchantment. Her demeanor becomes solemn as the child displays the emblem of a sinister being. Richard's countenance deepens, his eyes becoming fathomless, and he reveals a sinister grin as though under a spell. In an instant, he becomes unresponsive and falls to the ground. Mordred shouts in distress, but receives no reply. Suhelen simply casts a fleeting look his way and declares that he has successfully completed the evaluation. Mordred is astonished as she grins, deeming him fit to be her pupil. Night descends, enveloping the heavens in a dense, dark shroud. Fires dance within Richard's slumber. He strides through an ocean of flames, calling out for his mother. Elian's figure emerges in the distance, not glancing back, merely gently uttering his name. Richard extends his hand, but the image dissipates. He awakens with a start, soaked in icy perspiration, murmuring "Mother." A voice next to him remarks that he is at last alert. Richard whirls around, inquiring about the identity of the individual. The gentleman softly presents himself as Popovic, dispatched by the renowned sorcerer Suhelen to attend to him and instruct him in fundamental magic. Richard massages his forehead, still lightheaded, whispering Suhelen's name. He gazes at his hand in bewilderment, pondering what it accomplished in the past. Popovic clarifies that Richard experienced an occurrence during the ranking spring and received treatment and supervision, although his recollection is somewhat vague. Richard abruptly inquires with astonished eyes about the whereabouts of Mordred. In the distance, Suhelen observes the sky, reflecting that although Richard does not possess remarkable elemental prowess, his extraordinary character and Archimonde heritage probably captured the dark being's interest. Suhelen gazes at him with curiosity, inquiring about the consequences when a human form defies sinister forces. Mordred responses without reluctance, safeguarding young Master Richard is his obligation. She grins in astonishment at how easily he had jeopardized his life. Scoffing at his allegiance, she nonchalantly states that the charges for assessment and restoration amount to either 1 or 16 of Zhao's imperial gold coins. Mordred bows his head to request a loan, but Suhelen retorts that she is not a philanthropist, and he notes that Gordon will reassess the profit arrangements. Suhelen arches an eyebrow, indicating that the lad holds considerable value to them. Mordred asserts that the ominous force is deadly, and that solely a mythical sorceress such as herself possesses the ability to wield it. She grins cunningly, insisting on a share of 15% of their spatial earnings as compensation. Accept it or forfeit it. Mordred examines her intently. She chuckles, elucidating that she desires a portion of their internal energy timeline earnings instead. Mordred shakes his head, surpassing Gordon's threshold, but she icily cautions that she cannot assure the instruction of the lad otherwise. He exhales deeply, accusing her of avarice while vowing to confer with the manhwas and aspiring for a resolution. Suppressing a giggle with her hand, she concedes to assist Richard at the upcoming Eternal Dragon Temple prayer ritual. Mordred acknowledges and exits to convey the message, while Sue Helen declares she will bide her time for their response. Evening descends as the azure spire radiates enchantingly in the tranquil obscurity. In his chamber, Richard writhes and shifts uneasily. Reclining on his back, perspiration drips down his brow. Vague pictures cycle indefinitely within his thoughts. The partially tangible, partially deceptive ceremonial tableau re-emerges. Richard abruptly rises, confronted by this reality. It appears overwhelmingly intense. Unusual numerals suddenly materialize in front of his gaze. He Chinese letter, 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 Chinese letter. His irises constrict as a delicate azure aura materializes around them. No matter where he gazes, hovering data screens materialize. He mumbles in bewilderment at the figures lingering above the walls and shelves. Every item conveys data. Even cupboards and instruments disclose their particulars. Richard remains motionless, bewildered by the unfolding events. Liquid sprays as he gazes downward, observing numerous minuscule fragments in the atmosphere. His image gazes back completely perplexed. He grazes his eyes and comforts himself that it's not merely an illusion. Inclining his head, he perceives enhanced vision and auditory acuity, reminiscent of the ceremony. Examining the figures more intently, he understands they convey distinct significances. Illuminators and supports disclose dimensions and quantity information. The nightstand displays progressively transparent material details. Even a blade reveals intricate statistics. Terror encroaches, and he can discern the fundamental nature of things. Abruptly, dark energy encircles him, and he grips his skull in anguish. It's the ceremonial selection, re-emerging to trouble him. Beyond, the moon looms aloft in haunting stillness. The following morning, frantic raps resonate on the door. A voice beckons for fellow student Richard to avoid tardiness. He awakens today, marking the commencement of his journey into the realm of magic. In a quaint timber cottage, Richard inquires whether this is genuinely the classroom as pupils welcome instructor Popovic. Gesturing towards the audience in another location, he inquires about it, but Popovic clarifies that he is too youthful and today necessitates particular guidance. The renowned sorcerer commanded meticulous instruction, thus he ventures within. Upon entering the wooden chamber, Richard contemplates whether this diminutive space is genuinely an educational environment. Popovic grins serenely. He gestures towards a clock that emits a shimmering golden glow and indicates that they will be here shortly. Before Richard comprehends that the entrance swings open and a white haze inundates the area. At Popovic's enigmatic gesture, Richard scowls. The scene in front of him causes his eyes to broaden and astonishment to ensue. Popovic advances, and initially, Richard trails in an unfamiliar, novel environment that reveals itself ahead. The instructor spins around and greets him in the reflective classroom, introducing himself as Professor Popovic, his mentor in the realm of enchantment. Without hesitation, Popovic commences the first lesson, not ostentatious incantations, but the conceptual craft of perceiving and contemplating the enchanting realm. Amidst the tumult of life reside innumerable realms, each governed by its distinct principles. These guidelines constitute the framework of a realm, while areas serve as the vital essence that nourishes it. He clarifies that the Nalan landmass beneath them constitutes an elevated realm within the primary world. As he articulates, a delicate ember hovers in his hand, commonplace sorcery to many. Yet Popovic directs his attention towards Richard. Should awareness elevate, what you perceive in this space may not constitute reality. Even this mirrored chamber is merely an illusion mirrored in your consciousness. Richard remains there, his brow quivering. His hand caresses his jawline, while his mind grapples with the principles of spatial perception and deception. Popovic raises the torch and acknowledges that it's challenging to comprehend. Yet the esteemed sorcerer asserted that he must uncover this reality that will influence his forthcoming enchantments. As entities of the primary realm, their sorcery is constrained by the regulations of that world. Therefore, the initial phase in acquiring magical skills is essential. Popovic designates an emerging assignment in which Richard is required to construct his own distinctive magical edifice within a 3-month time frame. The concept circulates in Richard's icy consciousness, and the class concludes with a prompt to be timely the following day. 2 months pass in an instant. An enchanted portal swings ajar in the fabled sorcerer's realm as Sue Helen emerges elegantly, her fair hair and complexion radiating a gentle luminescence. All present incline their heads as she nonchalantly observes that gathering payments required almost 2 months. She inquires whether any significant events transpired, and an individual informs her of a dubious creature near the northern tower that demands her attention. When intrigued, she dismisses it and instead inquires about how Richard has been faring with Popovic. Popovic proudly unveils Richard's enchanting framework, asserting that the young boy has perfected fundamental incantations and accomplished something astonishing. Sue Helen squints her eyes, having arrived at this point already. Popovic radiates enthusiasm as he describes how Richard diminished structural error to 0.01 cm with remarkable consistency in merely 2 months. The encompassing sorcerer's vapors of such accuracy typically pertain to seasoned archmages. Popovic shakes his head. The masterpiece is the work of a mere novice. The audience grows hushed in astonishment. Abruptly, an individual gestures towards the residence hall and raises the alarm. Enchanted pyrotechnics exploded in the nocturnal heavens, releasing potent energy surges. Within the residence hall, where sorcery is prohibited after dark, Richard remains at the heart of the space, momentarily scowling before breaking into a victorious grin. Following 2 unwavering months, he has grounded his capacity to discern tangible substance, and with it, he finalizes his inaugural, self-designed magical framework. Popovic gazes in astonishment. The vitality is undeniably Richard's. He completed a 3-month endeavor in just 2. Moreover, he crafted his own enchantment, exceeding the abilities of most accomplished sorcerers. Such skill is exceptionally uncommon. Sue Helen pivots and inquires whether his physique has been misbehaving recently. Popovic presents a shimmering sphere, remarking that Richard's energy seems unstable, yet the young man is holding it together. Sue Helen contemplates the dorm's carefully curated atmosphere, realizing it's time for him to confront the realities of academic life. A month later, Deep Blue Magic Academy commences the new semester in complete disarray. Mina watches over the entrance like a vigilant hawk, cautioning no one as the newest pupils dash and complain. In the midst of the hurried activity, Richard arrives, stating that Popovic dispatched him, and Mina pivots. Pauses for a moment. Hold on, it's you. She identifies the singular Cephamus youth from the ranking spring, now more elevated and more defined. She guides Richard through the Grand Academy entrance, familiarizing him with each section and the bridge that lies ahead, the organized accommodations, and, subsequently, the educational area where he will learn. They pause at a classroom, and Mina states that this is his inaugural magic theory session, guiding him inside even though they are slightly behind schedule. She reminds him that he is less mature than the rest and should voice his thoughts if he feels uncomfortable. Richard interjects smoothly, affirming that he is capable of managing on his own. As he steps through the threshold, murmurs erupt. Speculation casts him as a genius with a daunting reputation, while some even assert that he is the apprentice of a mythical sorcerer, despite his diminutive stature making it difficult to believe. When the clamor reaches its crescendo, Mina intervenes, demands quiet, and reveals the identity of the new pupil. As Richard is summoned, all gazes fixate on the remarkably youthful yet strangely poised lad. The classroom bursts into conversation, straightforwardly inquiring whether he is indeed a pupil of that renowned sorcerer. Keeping everyone in suspense, Richard coolly refutes ever having encountered her. He claims to be an ordinary student directed by Popovic, grinning as if the gossip concerns others. The classroom is astonished, with the majority assuming a misinterpretation, except for Papin, who tightens his fists in sullen incredulity. Mina reinstates harmony and continues her instruction, although unease persists. As the bell tolls, constraints fragment, students rejoice, disperse, and the classroom hums once more. Richard simply gazes at his notebook, weary, as the material covered today has imparted no fresh insights. Popovic seems to declare that Richard will formally integrate into the complete academic experience next week, which astonishes him considering his elevated proficiency. Popovic acknowledges that Richard's ability is extraordinary, as he has surpassed the curriculum since creating his initial spell 7 months ago, only hindered by his youth. Richard scowls and requests to maintain the previous arrangement, but Popovic declines. The resolution stems from the renowned sorcerer, as the educational experience will mold not only his abilities but also his personality. Richard bristles at the thought that this illustrious mage continues to dictate his destiny without ever having encountered him. Popovic lightly touches his shoulder, smiling as he acknowledges that becoming her student is a unique privilege he ought to cherish. Everything is organized for his advantage, all meticulously overseen by her. Skeptical Richard RBH strides away in irritation, sensing deception and believing the library appears more advantageous. He hadn't traveled far when someone shouted, prompting Richard to spin around, still clearly displeased. Before he could comprehend the situation, Papin landed a surprise punch directly to his face, propelling him backward. The pupils above immediately burst into excitement upon discovering that a brawl had begun. Papin remained seething, labeling Richard a charlatan unfit for the esteemed title of the legendary sorcerer. As Richard stumbled forward, Papin continued to deride him as the purportedly legendary sorcerer's apprentice, inciting the audience even further. Liliana hurriedly approached and murmured to Tiana that Papin was an authentic level 2 sorcerer with true skill, but had consistently been dismissed as the fabled sorcerer's apprentice. So today his pent-up fury ultimately erupted. On the upper floor, Vanden nonchalantly confessed that he had intentionally circulated the gossip to irritate Papin and evaluate Richard, disregarding Minnie's caution against overstepping boundaries. Below, Papin tugged Richard up by the collar, mocking him to confess his identity until Richard's expression abruptly transformed. A recollection emerged of 6 months of intense training under Popovic, ranging from striking wooden posts to grueling exercises, all to sculpt his physique into a vessel robust enough to hold enchantment. He had withstood every blow and bead of perspiration, solely to become more powerful. In the current moment, Richard was no longer a feeble feline as he firmly seized Papin's wrist. The hold was so intense that Papin's visage contorted in anguish. Before anyone could even blink, Richard retaliated with astonishing speed, detonating Papin directly throughout the region. The assembly grew quiet, with Liliana and Tiana gazing in astonishment. Even Ed Pandel could scarcely comprehend what he had just witnessed. Richard retracted his hand and remarked composedly but icily, "You are the feeble one." Papin sprawled on the earth, clenching his teeth in rage, while others hurried to his side. In fury, Papin struck the earth and proclaimed himself a level 2 sorcerer before unleashing a fireball. The atmosphere sizzled, yet Richard simply lifted his hand, releasing an even more potent mana that illuminated the whole surroundings. The nearby students comprehended with dread that this was not a typical incantation. A level 3 inferno surged towards Papin, utterly overwhelming. It was a tier 3 firewall when amalgamating wind with fundamental fire sorcery to generate Wadiria harm and defensive interference. Boasting an immediate casting precision of 87, its capabilities are enhanced by 87. Typically, such configurations possess a negligible 0 error margin. However, even with my enhanced perception, I can only achieve approximately 80 in rapid activation. An individual above exhaled sharply, noting that even with a mere 87 instant precision, the level 3 incantation shattered a wall. This is no commonplace spell. The accuracy enhancement must be extraordinary, and that youngster is merely a recently admitted level fund mage novice. Richard remained astounded that he had employed a tier 3 incantation deserving of a renowned sorcerer's apprentice. Oops, getting overconfident there. The assembly hummed, utilizing almost a year's accumulation of acquired enchantments, and genuine confrontations were infrequent. Popovic had cautioned me against casting beyond my capacity, emphasizing that Richard's prowess greatly exceeded that of typical pupils. He flung a mystical arrangement designed to Papin primarily because the lad was still quite youthful. Papin cautiously extended his hand to grasp it. "Hey, Papin." Pandel twisted his mouth and thrust it into his grasp directed at Papin. An individual exclaimed not to overlook their arrangement following this. His relatives would leverage their clout to ensure Papin became the esteemed sorcerer's apprentice. The pupil dispersed in a frenzy, trying to escape. What's wrong with Papin? Has he lost his mind? He retrieved the enchanted arrangement. Impulsive spell casting within the academy was prohibited. This, a person of fluctuations, in uncomplicated terms, this is not a play area for children. Richard remained motionless as violet energy spiraled around him. His eyes expanded in astonishment at the 5th tier of magical enchantment. The power elevated him into the sky as he screamed in agony. Liliana went ashen. That was level 5 fundamental spiritual power sorcery. How could Papin possibly wield it? Papin clenched his jaw in torment. This incantation was part of the renowned sorcerer's personal arcane framework. Richard's visage contorted in anguish, perspiration streaming, as if he had just completed a grueling marathon in infernal conditions. Pandel observed from the periphery with a devious smirk. Richard grumbled that he could shift everything, not to mention implement a magical framework for a counteroffensive. And that penetrating sound seemed as though his cranium was being cleaved apart. Papin whispered to Pandel that it was nearly sufficient for just one lesson, but Pandel grinned, instructing him to be patient, despite Papin's anxiety that Richard might lose his sanity. Pandel was adamant about lingering, keen to observe what further antics Richard might engage in. Even insanity would be amusing. Richard's visage twisted, with his eyes firmly closed, veins protruding on his brow, reflecting anguish. He whispered, his brow creased and his pupil contracting. Abruptly, a wave of shadowy energy erupted from Richard's form. Papin gaped in astonishment as the dark energy surged toward him. The ominous energy enveloped him. What sort of fearsome strength could that be? The dark fumes dissipated, and Papin grasped his head, shrieking in agony. He collapsed onto the earth, lamenting his excruciating migraine, while instructors hurried to his side, following alerts of careless enchantment. Papin twisted frantically, appearing to lose his sanity, while Richard remained in a state of unconsciousness. Richard had also collapsed onto the ground. Vanden rushed down, infuriated that Papin had almost pushed the child to the brink of madness. The enchanted schematic rested upon the earth. He needed to recover it, using mana, before anyone realized it was his handiwork. A set of legs advanced towards the discarded blueprint. "Madam, we have discovered the enchanted talented schematic that Papin utilized, a mage declared with suspicion. Vanden gazed at Minnie in terror. Minnie clutched the document and glanced at Vanden, revealing the presence of yet another schemer. The ethereal gem verified that Papin had almost lost his sanity due to the unusual energy. He was the only one who perceived the bizarre force emanating from Richard, while others believed it had merely broken. She elucidated that during the application of her mystical abilities, it appeared that the shadow within Richard had taken advantage of the ethereal energy incantation. Suhalen inquired whether Richard had inadvertently started employing sinister forces, duly recognizing the esteemed sorcerer's apprehension. Lone and Zul advanced, informing that Pandal had faced consequences and inquiring Suhalen on the next steps to take. Lohan remarked that the provocateur had faced consequences, while Pandal was remarkably gifted. As the Duke Solemn, offspring of the revered tree lineage, even artisans Groves and Voss commended his craftsmanship skills, indicating he ought to retain his apprentice position. Zul contended that Duke Solemn possessed 2 additional talented sons, allowing them to dismiss Pandal and focus on securing paid enrollment for the others to obtain financing, which Shu Highland remarked could compensate for the previous season's deficits. Lohan protested that the apprentice positions at Shu Highland were valuable and should not be traded so carelessly. They would require the addition of another self-financed position. Reputation pertains to the future, but losses are immediate. I do not wish for Shu Highland to be overstretched merely to compensate for shortfalls. They contended that an excessive number of undeserving official apprentices would tarnish the reputation of Shu Highland and the Azure Magic Tower, although Zul maintained that finances were the cornerstone of the tower. Suhalen's supplementary financing would alleviate scarcities, as dragon resources had already been exhausted and pursuing them was draining. However, retaining ineffectual apprentices would diminish her brand's value, making choices consistently challenging. Lohan and Zul in chorus requested a resolution. She clasped her hands and responded affirmatively. Shu Highland's gaze sparkled vividly. When it pertains to grown-ups, she declines to select, causing Zul to exhale in exasperation at her atrocious greed for wealth once more. As Shu Highland prepared to depart, she observed that Richard had employed Tier 3 sorcery during the confrontation, commending Popovic's instruction. Popovic responded that it was Richard's remarkable skill, while Shu Highland reflected that she too could achieve that when she initially discovered magic. Popovic remarked that there was an additional factor contributing to the boy's success. Throughout the previous year, Richard had not solely focused on the study of magic, but also on his physique. Intellect and unyielding determination had all been shaped to uphold him. Richard once remarked that his mother devoted everything to shield him and instilled in him the essence of true manhood. He needed to cultivate sufficient strength to safeguard what he valued. Shu Highland pursed her lips, staring into the horizon with contemplation. The heavens radiated a brilliant gold beneath the gentle sunshine. Gazing upward, she contemplated that the profound azure could soon yield a genuine grand enchanter. A month later, someone notified Richard that a relative had come bearing numerous presents. He swiftly departed in that direction for a short while, curious if it was Gordon, preferably not. The door creaked ajar, causing Richard to become motionless. Upon encountering the individual in front of him, he fluttered his eyelids in bewilderment. Erin spun around, her voice subdued. "Richard, it's been ages since we last met." She included your half-sibling. 3 days prior at the Black Rose Castle, lights danced erratically. Gordon twirled the wine, observing that after a year in the profound azure, Richard had expanded significantly. The due date for his agreement with that avaricious woman was approaching, as Mordred was on assignment. Dace would accompany him to reconcile the finances and then remain in the deep azure. Dace faltered, stating that her mother's condition was deteriorating and she desired to remain by her side until the conclusion. Gordon responded icily, asserting that her mother was no longer deserving of the Archimond family's time and attention. One devoid of worth could not transform into a sword, merely remaining as residue. He commanded Dace to leave, and 2 days later she lowered her head and complied with gritted teeth. As Gordon departed, he noted that due to his lineage, Richard's peculiar affliction and his inadvertent connection to shadowy forces warranted monitoring. He instructed Dace to remain alongside Richard and observe him, while also bringing along a girl of noble lineage whom they had taken in, roughly the same age as Richard. Dace observed that the young woman had consistently managed intelligence operations. Gordon gazed at the obscured heavens and remarked that she could come back as a member of the familial lineage. Richard's prospective development would equip him to assume the family legacy. A year later, the deep azure metropolis loomed grandly, grave, and tranquil. Scholars discussed incomplete assignments and staying up late before classes recommenced. A young woman perched unclothed on her mattress prior to venturing outdoors. The beginning of a new semester had arrived, and inexplicably, a whole year had elapsed. Her tresses cascaded in the breeze as time raced by, and in certain respects, this location suited her more than Black Rose Castle. Meanwhile, Richard Richard commenced his third term of sorcery, approaching the age of 13. A servant entered its auditory passage. At this moment, the response arrived. She cast a look behind and instructed the arrangements for a wholesome feast for young Master Richard in the Azure Academy residence hall. Richard was performing push-ups for the upcoming term, perspiration cascading onto the ground. A voice called out, "Young Master Richard, Miss Dace is absent today, so I have arranged your complete meal," she stated, and he let out another sigh. Erin settled herself modestly, smoothing her hair. "Good morning, young Master Richard." He remembered that since his half-sister Dace started looking after him a year prior, Erin showed up once a week. She urged him not to linger for too long, mentioning that additional delicacies were on the way and he ought to consume them while they were still warm. Richard gazed at the plate and remarked that it consistently featured peculiar entrees. Erin presented the earthquake Komodo skeletons, profound ocean, and elite dwarven combatants, lava canyon conflict vintage. Richard grasped his cutlery, exhaling with the realization that each visit brought yet another series of gastronomic misadventures. Richard cast a look at Erin, his brows gently creased. Oddly enough, this servant consistently adorned herself in such a cheerful manner. What in the world was happening? Erin inquired as to why he wasn't consuming his meal. He clumsily asserted that he had just completed his training and wasn't feeling famished. She nudged the dish nearer, asserting that it was a unique restorative meal designed to enhance his vigor, even proposing to serve it to him, which caused him to flush and decline. Erin softly admonished that to acquire a dragon's might, one must possess a dragon's hunger, and these components were customized for his build. "And they arrive accompanied by my sincere affection as well," she added warmly. Bending in closer, she murmured that she could provide anything to cater to young Master Richard. Mid-bite, Richard's complexion turned crimson, and his gaze became unfocused. He crumpled to the ground, lamenting that the heat was intolerable as Erin became frantic. Pale vapor escaped his lips as lightheadedness enveloped him. Erin worried that she may have administered an excessive amount of medication, or perhaps after a year of accumulation, the consequences had finally erupted. She needed to soothe him. Amidst the misty vapor, Richard gradually awoke. He murmured that the meal had left him feeling dizzy. Erin gently inquired if he was alert, causing him to startle as he pondered her presence. She articulated that she was looking after him and that the therapeutic nourishment was powerful, eliciting a vigorous response. Richard. He sat upright, his body ablaze and his mind still spinning. Erin promptly assisted him, cautioning him to take care. He grimaced subtly, asserting he was merely a touch dizzy. Erin nodded, her demeanor shifting to one of seriousness. He could be reckless. The gathered herbs had ultimately revealed their complete potency today. She allowed him to lean against the bathtub, softly dabbing his brow as vapor enveloped the serene space. Erin quietly expressed that she previously believed she could solely exist according to others' plans. Richard partially lifted his eyelids as she persisted, stating that she would retain what he had just confided in her. Fragile yet distinct, he stated she belonged to no one's instrument. Each individual possesses their own journey. Erin's gaze quivered as she bowed her head and expressed her gratitude to him gently. Before long, Richard completely unwound and lost consciousness once more. Erin inhaled sharply, exclaiming towards her. She gently placed him down to slumber, exhaling wistfully as she remembered his remarks about each individual following their unique journey. Her stare became determined as she smiled subtly. Erin pledged to look after young Master Richard from this day forward. Outside, diamonds continued to gracefully revolve around the structure. Popovic abruptly declared that Richard had requested a day off today. Stevenson responded that Richard's attendant had conveyed he was unwell, although he had been vigorously completing his workouts the day before. On the inaugural day of the semester, and already procrastinating, what a nuisance. Stevenson quipped that it appeared destiny was preventing him from encountering Richard today. Popovic exhaled deeply, expressing that he had intended for the new illustrious mage initiates to encounter. He opted to facilitate introductions on the next occasion and lead him to the reflective classroom initially, as Stevenson contemplated Randall and smiled with a sense of wistfulness. Stevenson expressed his desire to extend an apology for the actions of his sibling, Randall. That reckless deed had disgraced their household. The pupils peered at the Sorum family emblem on his insignia, surmising he was the newly renowned mage recruit from afar, as Popovic articulated somberly. Popovic remarked that Richard was not one to harbor resentments and probably overlooked it throughout the year, while Stevenson commended Richard's accomplishments in employing level 3 magic as a level 1 mage apprentice and excelling in the class with his magic structure evaluations. Both Popovic and the renowned sorcerer Shu Highland were convinced that Richard would evolve into a master magic pattern designer. Popovic elaborated, asserting much more than that. Shu Highland harbors lofty aspirations that Richard will eventually transform into something remarkable. Popovic declared with pride that he would become a genuine magic design architect, humorously suggesting that perhaps he and Stevenson could ignite excitement in future creative partnerships. Although Stevenson quietly confessed he didn't didn't possess the skill for it, unlike his envious sibling. Nevertheless, that did not prevent him from eagerly anticipating his encounter with Richard, the cherished pupil, esteemed by Her Royal Highness. In the meantime, at Deep Blue's central library, Duel declared that Dace had come to conclude the Archimond family's monthly agreement, while reports indicated that Duke Sorum's offspring was anticipating a meeting. Shu Highland tersely responded that she was preoccupied and delayed them, despite the fact that they had already made Sorum's son wait for 3 hours. Dace courteously remarked that she didn't mind the wait, as Shu Highland frequently became engrossed in her tasks. Unexpectedly, Shu Highland called out from above, acknowledging Dace as Gordon's offspring. Encounter diverse aspects of recognition. A volume unexpectedly fell from above. Dace promptly seized it in mid-flight. Shu Highland grinned, instructing her to notify Gordon to refrain from imposing his perverse lineage aspirations on Richard. Richard was her pupil, and during his flourishing period, no diversions were permitted. In recompense for the affront, the monthly contractual payment would rise by 20%. Clutching the hefty volume, Dace paused and inquired about how she was aware. Shu Highland grinned mischievously. She had been aware from the outset and was simply intrigued by the Gourmet trials, cautioning that nothing in Deep Blue eluded her attention. She subsequently announced that Shed would visit her new pupil and generate a substantial gain from him. Zul's perspective, acknowledging her audacity and antagonizing Duke Sorum, was merely a component of a cunning plot to usurp Randall and extract additional remuneration. In the reflective classroom, Stevenson acknowledged that the conventional sorcery present was both mesmerizing and frightening, much like Randall had previously articulated. Presenting himself as Stephen's offspring, Randall's sibling, he observed that while they bore a resemblance, they were entirely distinct and had frequently heard tales of Minnie, the fabled sorceress's apprentice from the Neo-Marquis lineage. Minnie icily instructed him not to speak to her in a patronizing manner, to which he responded with composure that, although younger, he possessed significantly greater maturity than his sibling. Minnie's keen eyes focused intently on Duke Sorum's offspring. One was whispered to be an uncommon dragonblood sorcerer. Could that be him? Stevenson grinned, delighted that she was already aware of him. He outright declared that a partnership between the Neo-Marquis clan and the Sorum lineage would be advantageous for both parties. He sought to rectify the harm inflicted by his imprudent sibling Randall. Then he revealed the shocking news that they ought to establish a new commitment. Minnie blinked in astonishment and involvement. They had only just encountered one another. She contended that their families scarcely comprehended one another, much less emotions. Wasn't he being ridiculously hasty? Stevenson inclined his head respectfully, stating that his immediate connections to prominent families indicated that marriage was centered around advantage rather than emotion. Minnie snapped back that she was fed up with the family's self-serving rhetoric that Randall had suggested a year prior, wondering if all of Sorum's sons were as tedious. He merely sought to exchange insights with Miss Minnie. No urgency involved. He is not the antagonist in this situation. There is ample time, after all. Sorcerers of their kind take great pride in their rationality and serene composure. Minnie's expression hardened, and she remained silent. Stevenson unexpectedly grasped her hand, jesting that tranquil mages appeared dull, and courteously expressed regret if he had unintentionally upset her. He vowed to reconcile through genuine gestures at a later time. Her icy demeanor remained unchanged. Sue Helen interjected emphatically, declaring that flattery is worthless. Those who genuinely care communicate through their financial contributions. Stevenson and Minnie quickly rose and curtsied to her. Sue Helen filled her mouth and remarked, "A dragon vein warlock, huh? Not too shabby." Such exceptional skill truly compelled Stevenson to bow and express his gratitude to the illustrious sorcerer. Sue Helen mentioned that she had harassed numerous ancient dragons, acquiring a dragon-repressing aura that surely renders a dragon of his lineage uncomfortable. He grinned, remarking that her assistance for the Sorum family was invaluable and familial pressure was insignificant. Sue Helen gestured affirmatively, encouraging him to voice any discomfort he might experience. Ultimately, Sorum was covering the entire sponsorship, not merely half as previously arranged. Stevenson believed that only mountains of vanquished dragons could create such a counter-dragon power, and merely being her pupil was already a privilege. Sue Helen grinned and inquired about Sorum's recent endeavors, questioning whether he had attained legendary status yet. He responded that his father ascended to the mythical domain the previous year, and she inquisitively inquired about the route he selected. Stevenson gravely declared it was the path of the Shadow Warrior who shatters demons, a combatant possessing a formidable build and shadowy energy remarkably impervious to all forms of sorcery. She jested playfully that it was a sorcerer's bane with rapid-fire strikes and wondered why he hadn't opted for the sacred skill of a warrior instead. However, it was ultimately his father's last decision. Popovic observed that Sorum must still be tormented by that devastating loss from years past and expressed a desire to reconnect with his longtime companion. Sue Helen designated Stevenson as her pupil, yet currently apparently overwhelmed with commitments, she delegated his responsibilities to Popovic, who graciously accepted. She grinned, remarking that this meticulously organized journey would endure, and expressed optimism about meeting her new pupil, Richard. Unfortunately, he had fallen ill. Negating with a shake of her head, she advised Popovic to monitor him carefully during this upcoming academic year. Stevenson discovered himself incapable of uttering a single word. He affirmed that Her Majesty had managed all matters concerning Richard and would inform of any developments without delay. A week later, fall subtly made its entrance. At that instant, within an uncharacteristically quiet structure, Richard inscribed in a volume, immersed in contemplation. Regarding Mimi and Stevenson, he believed they should relish their enchanting university experience. Indeed, Your Majesty. The system conveyed comprehensive magical array specifications, and Richard reflected that, with an increased number of classes, he had diminished time to create configurations. Employing genuine understanding to scrutinize all data from the bequeathed mystical schematic, the system unexpectedly indicated a physical measurement of 36. Richard gasped in astonishment just as Aaron proclaimed that the meal had come. His cheeks reddened, lamenting this ridiculous genuine talent, while Aaron anxiously inquired about the issue. She remarked that it had been incessantly mumbling digits, and he clumsily inquired about the meal of the day. He gazed at the table, perplexed by the commonplace meal. Aaron murmured that Ms. Mimi declared no additional burden of tonics after the previous occasion nearly overwhelmed him. Richard whirled around, attributing the blame to her for overloading him the prior week, and she playfully suggested she could modify her approach if he desired. He vigorously shook his head, indicating no further modifications. Thank you. She remarked that she had attired herself more conservatively as instructed, and he became flustered, implying that he meant she shouldn't venture out in that manner. Aaron specified that this attire was exclusively for visiting young Master Richard. Flustered, he hurried to consume his meal while grumbling about the stacks of assignments awaiting him. Inclining her head, Aaron extended assistance with her magic assignments, disclosing that she had also delved into the subject. She assertively asserted robust training at approximately level 3 mana and substantial arcane comprehension. Richard was astonished by her almost level 3 mana as she incorporated her research into the circle, which included the influential family supporting specific students. He swiftly interrupted her, stating that he was already aware of it. He noted his absence from the esteemed mage apprentice assembly because of an ailment and learned about a new addition, Stephen's son. Because Stephen's son pursued his studies in a different location, Richard had not encountered him, but he was intrigued by his unique heritage. He inquired whether she could unearth details about him, and her eyes immediately glimmered. She extended her hand, presenting a golden coin. She smiled, referring to it as an intellect charge. Ultimately, that is an informant's hallowed principle. In the interim, the immense clock's hands continued to move. Aaron hurried out in a frenzy, anxious about almost reaching the curfew while attending to Richard. Twilight was descending, and she was nearly tardy. She unexpectedly collided with someone and expressed her regrets. Stephen's son halted her, urging her to pause. In a hushed tone, he inquired whether she was Aaron, and she whirled around, taken aback. She insisted on how he was acquainted with her, and he responded that he was even aware of her identity. In a derisive manner, he referred to it as Richard's private aid. The twilight enveloped the heavens in diminishing illumination. Aaron continued sprinting up the lengthy staircase, his heart racing. The image of Stephen's son repeatedly played in her thoughts. She recognized that he was anything but straightforward, and the sensation of being scrutinized rendered her cautious. Hindered on her return journey, she concluded that her sole alternative was a teleportation portal. Although it bore a price of that golden coin, she gazed at it in her hand. Her visage clouded. Abruptly, a surge of brilliance erupted in front of her. Stephen's son resurfaced, observing that Shed had even resorted to teleportation to evade him, a costly maneuver for an individual of her standing. He remarked that such a cost was considerable for her sense of self. He comforted her serenely that his intentions were harmless. He merely wished to converse and suggest an arrangement while throwing her a bag of coins. Within were 200, partially obscured in darkness. He remarked that he hadn't adequately presented himself. He proclaimed himself Stephen's son, heir of the Sorum lineage. Undoubtedly, she had not overlooked that name. He gazed intently, recognizing that their lineage once had connections to her heritage, and proposing a more transparent conversation. Aaron remained mute, his gaze keen with doubt as he asserted his familiarity with her predicament. What astonished him was that the Archimond clan retained her close to Richard. He grinned at the notion that someone of her background, caught up in significant familial plots, was anything but straightforward. Aaron scowled and instructed him to release her. Lifting his hands, he emphasized that the gold represented merely goodwill and that a pledge of collaboration could liberate her from her present condition. Aaron gazed at the bag before inquiring what he desired. Stephen's son responded straightforwardly, expressing his desire for her to support him and serve as his assistant. Liberty and appropriate standing were readily attainable. He articulated deliberately, a accumulating tension. Wasn't this precisely what she had always desired? Abruptly, a highly tangible form emerged in the atmosphere. It swatted his hand aside. Stephen's son was startled as someone was meddling. Minnie's frosty tone echoed, declaring that the Sorum family's tactics were as disagreeable as always. She suggested that their approach to tasks continued to vex everyone. Taken aback by her presence, he asserted that she had misinterpreted the situation, but she calmly responded that it didn't seem like a just arrangement. He grinned and confessed that it concerned Richard Archimond, causing Minnie's gaze to dart immediately at the mention of his name. He observed that the Nell family had faced considerable challenges over the past year. Their domain was at risk, and competing factions were becoming increasingly formidable. The individual orchestrating everything was Viscount Elise Archimond. Should it persist, even Marquis Gordon Archimond might intervene, and then not even Sorum's assistance could mend the wearisome old recollections that rattled Minnie. He remarked that her previous allegation against his sibling demonstrated she was just as scheming as he was. Therefore, she must be aware of which option served her best, or else the matrimonial agreement would disintegrate and the neo-lineage would falter. He hesitated, cautioning that she and Aaron would ultimately turn out no differently. The weighty phrases constricted the atmosphere as Minnie balled her hands into fists, yet remained mute. A month later, students were abuzz over the published exam outcomes, aware that the rankings would influence their future mage categorization. As anticipated, Richard once more claimed the top position, despite skepticism from others who argued that his level 3 sorcerer prowess and esteemed mentor rendered it inevitable. Richard dismissed the accolades and then abruptly inquired about Aaron's whereabouts. Dace stated that Aaron communicated his deteriorating health and notified the superiors. While Gordon focused on Richard's education, her absence was acceptable, although Dace remained unaware of her location. Richard became quiet, his gaze losing its luster as a peculiar void surged within him. In Tamlem, apart from Popovic, only Aaron ever brought him genuine comfort, and he murmured, "Where did she disappear to?" An unusual feeling of absence enveloped me, as though something recognizable had silently disappeared. A magnificent ancient fortress emerged in the distance, within the classroom teeming with the captivating presence of the esteemed artist. He commenced delivering a discourse on the statue, the everlasting emblem of classical artistry. He portrayed its flawless dimensions from head to torso, shoulders to waist, with limbs in accord, embodying harmonious contrast and the quintessential essence of Greek beauty. He emphasized that the absence of arms on Venus heightened its charm, igniting boundless creativity throughout the ages. However, although the class was captivated, Richard was mentally distant. The esteemed artist abruptly summoned him with a trace of derision, evidently aware of his inattentiveness. Beneath the scrutinizing stare, Richard uncomfortably rose and confessed that his mind had wandered. He clarified that he possessed prior familiarity with the statue. The chamber hummed immediately, some intrigued while others remained subtly doubtful. Richard commenced serenely observing the statue's 2-meter stature and marble composition, united at the gracefully draped waist. He scrutinized its head-to-body proportion according to the Perlaisippo's ideal standard, proclaiming it a perfect exemplar of classical beauty. While others continued to grapple with theoretical abstractions, Richard left the classroom in awe. He elaborated on the golden ratio division at the waistline, achieving an almost flawless tripartite visual harmony. He even elucidated the S-curve dislocated center of mass and the delicate rotation, elegant yet unwavering allure at its pinnacle. Even the esteemed artist conceded that Richard's perception exceeded his own presentation, granting him exceptional commendation. Acclaim was accompanied by some disapproving glances. Ultimately, the child was exceptionally intelligent, and scarcely anyone had genuinely engaged with him over the past year. Nevertheless, Richard disregarded them. Only one individual occupied his mind. Aaron's likeness was recalled from their initial encounter onward. From tranquil weekend dinners she concocted, to her soothing suggestions to assist him in relaxing following his tiring academic pursuits. She previously stated that she desired to be his companion. The more he recalled, the greater his heart felt the burden. Even after the lesson, he remained in the library, unable to focus on reading until he was asked to depart. The night descended, enveloping everything in an almost unsettling stillness, followed by the sound of footsteps reverberating. Richard strained against the past deadline. No one ought to be present there. The system showcases well-known metrics for stature and physique, presenting an almost flawless correspondence. His gaze expanded. It was Aaron. He pursued her and shouted her name, yet she fled as though evading him. Having no alternative, he employed a minor incantation to pause. Aaron stumbled, and he hurried ahead to grasp. Distressed and agitated, he insisted on explanations for her prolonged absence spanning a month. Nevertheless, she responded with indifference, shoving him aside as though they had never shared a bond. He then observed contusions on her neck. Her erratic pulse and subdued feelings revealed that she was grappling with something. His voice intensified, urging her to reveal the reality. She responded just a single time. It was her decision as she required funds and wished to escape her situation. Richard almost relinquished control, asserting that he and his family were capable of assisting. Erin merely nodded her head, composed yet anguished, her incomplete phrases I wish to avoid, as they sliced through the atmosphere like a hush dagger. As the evening grew darker, Erin abruptly requested her funds back from Richard. Prior to the alleviation of tensions, an individual interrupted, inquiring about his presence in the dormitory at such a late hour. Stevenson perceives the instant of dwindling amiability and the pride of being a renowned sorcerer's pupil. Richard dismissively interrupted him before he could complete his sentence. Without delay, he averted his gaze, offering only a brief apology as he wasn't in the right frame of mind. Stevenson made an enigmatic statement, suggesting that someday Richard would yearn to discover his identity. Outside, a slender moon hovered above the tranquil campus. Richard strolled solitary, his shadow extending far, his heart far from serene. Fury boiled beneath the surface as his solitary inquiry resonated. Who? His hands balled into fists, a shadowy energy emanating as his anger surged. In an instant, he sprinted into the night so swiftly that the adjacent birds dispersed in alarm. His mind was consumed by a singular notion. He needed to locate that individual. By dawn, the institution hums with its typical activity, yet amidst the clamor, Richard remained solitary in a secluded nook. His intense stare revisited the recollection of the previous evening. The vision of the girl departing the dormitory replayed in his thoughts. Without delay, he commenced his search, examining every nook for hints. He ultimately halted in front of a towering structure, gaze steady with conviction. He was convinced that the individual he was searching for was among the students of the academy. At that moment, Popovic emerged, playfully chiding him for his prolonged absence. Richard bypassed formalities and promptly inquired about a permit to Sunset Harbor. Popovic's demeanor shifted to somber as he depicted it as a murky realm of illicit agreements and criminals. It was not a suitable environment for a scholar. Richard asserted that his arcane inquiries necessitated a visit to that location. Despite comprehending his rationale, Popovic declined his responsibility for student safety. Richard bowed his head, acknowledging that his plea was unreasonable. As he began to depart, Popovic halted him with an additional notion. If he were neither the instructor nor the pupil, he could provide guidance in pursuing the new artistic mentor. Richard glimpsed a flicker of optimism, expressed his gratitude, and departed. His thoughts were already devising a strategy. Popovic's admonition reverberated in his mind. Everything in this place was regulated, and no one dared to overstep the bounds, not even a renowned magician's apprentice. Richard contemplated. Perhaps the secret resided with the artistic maestro, and the sole connection to him would be an earnest piece of art. In the art lesson, the instructor concluded the session by requesting illustrations of the woman residing in their hearts. Tranquil on the surface, he was tumultuous within. Uninterested, instructing magic-obsessed brats seemed like a squandered existence were it not for a wager with His Royal Highness and overwhelming financial obligations that brought him to this point. Examining their creations merely intensified his fatigue. One after another compelled him to grasp his head. He massaged his temples, feeling lightheaded from overwhelming irritation. He then halted before a painting, its style distinct from anything in their realm. He whispered in astonishment, was this from the highest achiever? He even uttered Richard's name in astonishment. A rap disrupted the atmosphere. He steadied himself and summoned Richard in. Richard arrived frigid and aloof, and the art instructor candidly suggested an arrangement to retain the artwork. He exuberantly commended the gentle illumination on the young woman, the soft contours embodying innocence and subtle melancholy, admiring Richard's unforeseen creative brilliance. Subsequently, his voice lowered as he proposed a trade for entry to Sunset Harbor, discreetly hinting at potential repercussions. Richard replied composedly that he would assume all risks personally. He even candidly referred to speculation regarding the exchange of artworks infused with prohibited magical patterns. The expression of the art instructor shifted to one of fury as he refuted the claim and called for evidence. However, Richard required merely his pulse and responses to validate his assumption. With a slight grin, he exerted gentle pressure, drawing upon his reputation as a renowned major student from a family renowned for its intellect, a household renowned for surveillance that had previously possessed the list of transactions. Pushed into a corner, the art master's expression changed repeatedly before hesitantly consenting to organize a tour of Sunset Harbor. Richard nonchalantly elevated the stakes rather than retreating, trapping the instructor and transforming the agreement into a one-sided ultimatum. He insisted on gaining entry to covert connections at Arlo Port to locate an individual capable of instructing him in the art of assassination, instantly freezing the atmosphere. 48 hours later, Richard appeared unaccompanied at Arlo Port's teleportation hub, the infamous haven of vice and dubious transactions. A sorcerer's artifact incredulously astonished that a simple adolescent had the audacity to wander into such such a lair. Richard quietly displayed his permit and solicited a guide, thereby immersing himself in an anarchic realm of dimly lit streets and societal misfits, where inquisitive staircases and enticing propositions cultivated an oppressive, perilous atmosphere. He was delivered to NAI, the individual orchestrating the illicit commerce, who immediately perceived that he was not an average child and became intrigued. A month later, at the grim subterranean training facility, Richard stayed composed and concentrated amid the turmoil surrounding him. One day, he noticed his own artwork discarded on a freight cart for barter, his reality swaying momentarily before he stifled the astonishment. Following his training, an eye casually tossed him his remuneration with a smirk, playfully inquiring whether he had ever worried about being slain on the scene. Richard composedly responded that he could perceive lethal intent more acutely than the majority. He consistently carried merely sufficient funds for the day, since eliminating him yielded no gain, whereas educating him promised substantial rewards. His piercing reasoning caused NAI to chuckle, although she cautioned that assassins operate on risk evaluation, not solely financial rewards. She had scrutinized him, Richard, a pupil of Shanlin Academy, where malevolent sorcery was rigorously prohibited. That was the reason he arrived here, to acquire their developed abilities, and when inquired about whom he wished to eliminate, he nonchalantly replied that he had not yet made a choice. He asserted that the training would enable him to recognize the objective, causing NAI to become unexpectedly more earnest. Richard subsequently disclosed his genuine objective beyond evading Academy scrutiny. He desired the assassin's unique locating method, a skill to track quarry through faint indicators, the true essence of his final objective. The instructor was astonished that concealed tracking skills were not something an ordinary adolescent ought to grasp, yet Richard assertively contended that the expert's extensive global network could uncover an appropriate guide. His gentle voice still elicited shivers along the man's spine, as Richard was unmistakably aware of his history. From being a distinguished visitor at imperial courts to interacting with celebrated rune experts, Richard calmly assessed that in the enchanting realm, rune masters crafted wonders and maintained mythical strength. Nevertheless, they also posed serious dangers to those in power. If left uncontrolled, they could bring down entire countries. Consequently, groups rushed to seize and utilize them. This gave rise to extensions of authority ranging from rune knight legions to prestigious assassination syndicates adept at influencing conflicts. The educator was unsettled, coming to terms with the fact that he could conceal nothing from this disturbingly insightful youngster. He subsequently proceeded to elucidate the realm of rune masters, whose mythical weapons and equipment once molded history and epitomized the strength of formidable forces. Richard candidly unveiled the artist's ruse for trafficking rune designs, striking directly at the instructor's vulnerability. The instructor could merely falter that it was entirely to settle obligations. Richard promptly dismissed that, pointing out that the Academy explicitly prohibits such behaviors. Trapped, the instructor conceded that, in addition to rune knight factions, covert assassination divisions are present, and that is the origin of the tracking technique. He presented the name Tithe Ronin, and in that instant, Richard comprehended N.I.'s genuine identity. Richard then calmly reminded him that assassins are in high demand, and a single slip could jeopardize everything. This was not a mere request, but rather checkmate. As the tension reached its zenith, N.I.'s voice interjected, both amused and evaluative, unmistakably impressed. She even increased the fee for the upcoming meeting to 500 gold for premium rune tracking sessions, but cautioned that without rune scripts and fundamental resources from a rune expert, the practice was futile. Richard replied serenely that it was not a problem. Eventually, he had transformed into a rune master himself. A month later, his cognitive framework ultimately assembled an individualized interpretation of the tracking rune configuration. In the meantime, Dai Essie observed Richard becoming more withdrawn, sneaking out each night, and even requesting substantial amounts of money, which was undoubtedly questionable. Suddenly, an exhilarated exclamation erupted from his chamber as Richard emerged, fatigued yet radiant, distinctly having achieved a significant advancement. In his thoughts, a month of unwavering evaluation finally converged. After meticulously refining every aspect of the rune, he adeptly reproduced the tracking artwork. It connected directly via remnants left by the objective, transforming it into an alert mechanism when associated individuals emerged. Although merely partially effective because of material constraints, it demonstrated that his course was correct. To advance further, there was solely one path officially recognized to attain the status of a rune master. Richard sought PPAC for prompt admission into the rune master trajectory. Notwithstanding the rank stipulations, he contended that his influence had long exceeded the limit, and he declined to squander any further time. His company left PPAC immersed in contemplation. Ultimately, he consented and composed an endorsement to the Academy's foremost rune master for admission. However, he cautioned that there would be no deviations. Richard, astonished astonished him once more by declining fundamental preparation, asserting that he had previously finished the introductory framework. Before long, he emerged at the enrollment amidst a throng of PPAC enthusiasts, all aspiring to become rune champions. Richard silently watched. An abrupt notification echoed in his thoughts. His self-constructed monitoring system responded with widened eyes. He swiftly followed the signal. Amidst the disarray, he detected the hint of Ein Rallion, but became immobilized at the name inscribed on the label CTLVN. 48 hours later, a layer of autumn gold enveloped the metropolis. Nevertheless, the institution radiated with anxiety as the outcomes for the rune department were unveiled. Elation, despondency, and even repeated failures clinging to optimism. The atmosphere was charged and oppressive. Everyone understood that the path to becoming a rune master was reserved for genuine prodigies. Some, approaching their 30s, still failed to meet Master FDN's expectations. Meanwhile, others reassured themselves that even seasoned apprentices could be excruciatingly mediocre. Amidst the murmurs of the audience, I turned my attention to Richard, a mere level 2 sophomore audacious enough to enroll, igniting speculation regarding partiality and skepticism about his abilities. Richard silently disregarded the steps, clutching his letter. Upon opening it, a gentle radiance illuminated. The communication was straightforward, yet surprising. He departed and was called to Rune 3 at 3 p.m. for additional assessment. Precisely on schedule, Richard stepped into the dimly illuminated, weighty classroom. Before long, Stephen's son and numerous recognizable figures appeared, bringing with them a familiar aura that was both relaxed and vigilant. The atmosphere surrounding the trio immediately became charged with unease. Finn revealed that, after a decade, 3 individuals successfully completed the examination, a piece of information that astonished Richard. However, what captivated him the most was Stephen's offspring, the sole individual connected to Erlin during the assessment. When Finn verified that all 3 were followers of a renowned sorcerer, Richard discovered that the intricate relationships were considerably more convoluted than anticipated. Stephen's offspring advanced, presenting himself as the youngest heir of the Suramu lineage, his composed voice imbued with subtle authority. Richard tightened his hands into fists, stress escalating as recollections of Erlin emerged, slaying profound ooze emanating from him, frigid and weighty, creating Stephen. In that instant, the chamber became hushed, enveloped in their unseen impasse. A fierce determination glimmered in Richard's gaze as he struggled to maintain his composure. Stevenson abruptly shouted for Minnie, insisting that she validate their planned union in front of the entire assembly. A single remark was sufficient to strip Minnie of her hue, as if thrust into an unexpected glare. The illustrious sorcerer Finn was on the verge of proceeding with the proclamation of findings when Minnie interjected, her courteous tone unmistakably designed to assert authority. She advanced and grasped Stephen's hand in unambiguous affirmation. She announced their betrothal and union between the Nell and Suram households, and even extended an invitation to Finn for the event, astonishing everyone present before he extended his felicitations. Minnie even summoned Richard, causing his expression to cloud as he re-evaluated everything. Stevenson composedly highlighted that Minnie had consented to the commitment as a respectable arrangement and encouraged all to partake in the happiness. In the meantime, Richard remained motionless, swiftly assessing the circumstances. His doubts regarding Erlin and the previous magical symbols re-emerged. He reminded himself that a knobologic arrangement suggested that neither of them would be able to inflict harm on a subordinate servant. Finn then sliced through the strain, redirecting attention back to the assessment. He candidly remarked that their engravings were merely at an elementary level, so rather than evaluating their scores, he would carry out a live demonstration to assess their engraving skills. The term experiment immediately put Richard on high alert. The expanse before them unfolded with an expanding mystical illumination, guiding them toward the evaluation zone. Before them was a regulated experimental, being designed to assess inscription impacts. Velocity response and alteration statistics showcased distinctly, transforming the examination into an eerily captivating experience. The trial left Richard feeling uncomfortable. Finn was essentially employing live beings as experimental subjects, and Minnie's outcome barely surpassed 20 optimal, which left her confused by the lackluster ranking. Finn composedly clarified that authentic inscription artistry entails more than mere attractive illustrations. It must endure practical evaluations. Subsequently, Stevenson and Richard were summoned for the subsequent phase. Stevenson bragged about employing premium or superior resources to achieve the top position, whereas Richard quietly scrutinized the complete evaluation framework. The atmosphere became charged as the primary proceedings commenced and conjecture ceased. Only unvarnished outcomes would now have a voice. Stevenson, still somewhat unsettled, gazed at Richard and inquired as if seeking confirmation. Richard nodded his head, stating that he was merely a little wobbly. Nevertheless, internally he was unsettled. His chamber should have responded with at least a 50. Yet this time, there was complete silence silence, devoid of any recognizable variation, leading him to doubt that his initial target could be the actual perpetrator. Opposite him, Stevenson observed Richard's peculiar stare and became noticeably more astute and defensive. At that moment, the trial area proclaimed 400 meters for 5 circuits in 8 minutes and 4 seconds, with a velocity surge of 33 minifron. Stevenson laughed softly, feeling discontent, yet regarding it as satisfactory for an initial structural evaluation. Nonetheless, his gaze radiated dominance. The system subsequently summoned Richard for the forthcoming experiment. Upon hearing his name, Richard halted, his eyes darting immediately. Before him loomed a being that was part human, part equine, introduced into the arena. Its frigid, vacant gaze once served solely as an instrument. Rune illumination descended, and the third challenge commenced. From an external perspective, FIM noted that Richard employed standard beast components that were almost of the lowest quality. However, his acceleration impact was consistent and compared favorably with superior constructs. Stevenson mocked internally, certain that his superior high-quality hide could never be outmatched by inferior deer pelts. However, when the outcomes were disclosed, the ambience transformed. 8 minutes and 5 seconds, a speed enhancement nearly equivalent to Stevenson's elimination of the material disparity. Ministiffen and Stevenson were unable to conceal their astonishment. He couldn't comprehend how inexpensive materials corresponded with his high-quality leather. FIM ultimately clarified that expertise resides not in substances, but in rune arrangement and architectural accuracy. Richard amended imperfections with skill, the genuine hallmark of an inscription virtuoso. Stevenson became quiet. Richard continued to observe the being, his gaze deepening. As FIM mentioned that Stevenson's accelerated duration resulted in detrimental consequences and volatility. Conversely, Richard's physique harmonized rapidity and security, the true benchmark that garnered him premier accolades in the selection process. A halo of illumination emerged, heralding the ultimate outcome. However, beneath the apparent magnificence, Stevenson and Minnie were far from composed. Stevenson gritted his teeth, conceding that their strategy had come apart from the outset, and Richard had already perceived something beyond what was anticipated. He recounted every moment from that unsettling sensation to the peculiar test responses, and determined that Richard was not a typical inscription pupil. Minnie, positioned nearby, became apprehensive as their matrimonial plot and strategic political maneuvers began to unravel. Stevenson determined that due to the early revelation, they needed to revamp the strategy and eliminate the problem before it disseminated. Twilight lanes submerged in faint nocturnal illumination, pedestrians transformed into featureless silhouettes. Aaron navigated through the throng, paused at a dilapidated store, and conversed casually as the proprietor candidly inquired if she had brought the advance payment. Aaron quietly deposited a substantial stack of gold, affirming the agreement regarding the South Continent passes to be settled in increments. In another location, Stevenson seethed, unable to comprehend that a mere level 2 individual such as Richard surpassed his performance. He was convinced he had made impeccable preparations, aided by a level 7 sorcerer known as Minnie, premium resources, and countless attempts for a 33 rune, yet he still faced defeat, leading him to believe that Richard had concealed support. Doubt rapidly transformed into a lethal resolve as he glanced at Aaron, insisting on finding out whether she concealed anything. She merely disclosed fragments of Richard's timetable organized by Daisy. Following the directive to sever ties with Richard, her access was already quite limited. Dissatisfied, Stevenson erupted, pulling her down and reinforcing her subservient position and his total authority. His frigid remarks left Aaron weeping in silence as he asserted that complete compliance was the cost for assured advantages. As Stevenson departed, he suddenly altered his plans, instructing Aaron to engage with Richard once more. This occasion was not about concealment, but rather about revealing the reality that the individual she reached out to was not him, as she orchestrated another fabricated maneuver at his preferred time and location. In his gaze, Richard was no longer straightforward, and everything necessitated increased vigilance the following morning. Gentle sunlight enveloped the city as though everything was ordinary. However, beneath the surface, the plan altered course as Richard remained quiet, preoccupied with his incomplete analysis of the dune structure. Despite nearly comparable performance being limited to 50 because of subpar beast materials, he was compelled to acknowledge that he required superior resources and, consequently, enhanced research accomplishments. In his thoughts, all signs indicated Finn, who had suggested that Richard possessed something more significant, a mixture of admiration and caution that only intensified his insecurities. When Finn asserted that his task was overly flawless for level 2, Richard refuted it. However, Finn referred to Danxia as an invisible influence, conducting Tam Lam where the artistry of inscription wielded influence, and solely those in harmony with Hyrule progressed. Stevenson's likeness re-emerged in Richard's thoughts, vivid and vexing. Even though the runes did not respond respond to him, Richard's instincts remained unsettled. Abruptly, his physique quaked, and the symbol in his hand illuminated unexpectedly, as though activated. Richard pivoted, surveying the surroundings, immediately recalling Aaron. Without a moment's pause, he sprinted outside, calling her name but merely. The empty stillness of the hallway responded. Directly before her gaze rested a tranquil message, as though Sidon's offspring had preordained each moment meticulously. 3 days zipped past for Aelin, yet crawled like a chilling dream in slow motion. The recollection of Sidon's son's weekend gathering continued to resonate in her mind. The gathering was scheduled for the most tranquil moment, compelling her to arrive early, evidently intentional. The selected location was the western wall bordering the periphery, so abandoned that cries would seek isolation. Aelin felt restless and irritated, yet she could not dismiss her apprehension regarding Sidon's son's genuine purpose. In the meantime, Sidon's offspring enlisted Pabin, a disgraced student from Zenlun Academy filled with resentment, viewing both him and Aelin as disposable pawns. That evening, Aelin was pulled into the very narrative she dreaded and confined in terror. Fragile and quaking, she confronted Pabin's contorted anguish exposed. Motivated by animosity and retribution, Pabin dwelled on his shattered history, transforming anguish into something perilously distorted. Then Litshade appeared, shivering at the scene before him. A surge of lethal determination radiated from him as he charged at Pabin without hesitation. The Academy's regulations faded from his thoughts, and Pabin scoffed, presuming Litshade would not have the audacity to attack. He was demonstrated to be mistaken, as unyielding strikes brought him to the ground and crimson splattered. Turmoil. The intense atmosphere grew even more charged as Litshade fought with the ferocity of a man possessed, focused solely on overwhelming his enemy. In the midst of chaos, Aelin rested feeble and diminishing, her hazy sight continuing to seek Litshade. Stevenson's enigmatic remark regarding a performance flickered in her thoughts, and she recognized that this calamity was a contrived drama unraveling uncontrollably. Litshade faltered in astonishment, murmuring Aelin. Observing her untidy and vulnerable state, he struggled to comprehend why she would safeguard Pabin. She responded curtly that this was unrelated to him, Litshade. He objected and expressed skepticism, his voice trembling. Aelin abruptly shouted for him to depart, asserting that everything was consensual. Tears welled as she compelled him to witness what she referred to as her authentic self. Litshade remained speechless until she exclaimed that the attack at Chenlin Academy warranted harsh repercussions, prompting him to flee. In anguish, he clenched his jaw tightly, tears streaming quietly. He stumbled off as Aelin bowed her head, whispering that she was no longer part of. The following day, Stevenson was perplexed that no one had sustained any injuries. His subordinate verified that the sorcery agency found no evidence of arcane conflict, plunging Stevenson into a state of enraged incredulity. The subordinate rushed away to reaffirm under Stevenson's stern directive. Stevenson seethed, convinced that his extravagant plan leveraging Pabin's resentment and position to penetrate Chenlin Academy ought not to have collapsed. The strategy was straightforward. If Pabin attacked Aelin prior to Litshade, it would provoke his violent fury. If Litshade were to take a life within the Academy, his expulsion and a homicide accusation would bring an end to him. Nevertheless, no enchantment was employed, and while Stevenson contemplated this, Minnie Cooley noted that women are not so effortlessly governed. He cast her a piercing look, inquiring what she intended. Minnie disregarded his arrogance, accepted the accursed armor emblem, and disclosed that she had orchestrated an assassin. The objective was Mend Litshade, although she cautioned that no one perishes without notice at Chenlin Academy. When Stevenson anticipated that she would take his life, Minnie interjected with a falsehood, who claimed that she cast her eyes upon the dragon hide piece, inscribed with peculiar markings, and beamed. What she desired was his lifeblood to trigger the cursed glyph. In another location, two pupils joyfully arranged to convene at the athletic ground after depositing their textbooks, blissfully ignorant of the tempest developing. Above, a furious voice snapped that there would be no more truancy. Minnie reprimanded that Litshade had absented himself for 3 consecutive days, and strict measures would jeopardize the promising prospects of a distinguished mage student. Being the apprentice of an iconic sorcerer exacerbated the situation, and Daisy could only exhale in resignation. She remembered the entreaties from outside, as Litshade had declined nourishment for 3 consecutive days. Daisy stated that he had confined himself, declining to meet with anyone. Nobody was aware of what transpired with him 3 nights prior. In a pitch-black chaotic chamber, Litshade huddled by himself. He gazed at his quivering hands. The events of that evening replayed in his mind. He had nearly taken a life. Litshade clamped shut, clammy with frigid perspiration. The feeling of almost perpetrating homicide tormented him. Aelin's excruciating embarrassment surged vividly in his mind. He quaked in fear, murmuring her name. His entire physique trembled incessantly. Without warning, glass fragmented when an object was hurled into his chamber. Astonished, he bolted upright to examine. A radiant ring illuminated the object as he perceived Aelin's essence. essence. Terror enveloped him. It was her garments. He abruptly swung the window wide. Noticing a silhouette beneath, he exhaled Ayland. He stood still in astonishment. How could it be? Her voice resonated, indicating she was no longer his, and anguish pierced deeper. His swift strides echoed throughout the night. Litshade pursued the girl who resembled Ayland. Breathless, he pondered where Shed had disappeared. He then observed her making her way towards the external barrier. The realization dawned that this was the boundary of the city. He dashed after her, exclaiming for her to pause. The silhouette halted as though anticipating him, and he cried out, Ayland. His eyes expanded in astonishment, lacking. After a moment of indecision, she leaped. From above, he shouted in terror. As he observed her disappear into the woods, he shouted her name. As he bent over the barrier, an individual stealthily approached from behind. With no compassion, they pushed him aside. Litshade tumbled from the towering barrier, crying out in terror. Fortunately, a tree limb intercepted it during its descent. He grasped firmly onto the life-preserving limb. His form hung, suspended above the woodland ground. Both hands clutched the limb fervently. Abruptly, a murderer with overt thirst for blood surged towards him. The assailants severed the limb completely. Litshade plummeted to the ground amidst fractured timber. He extended a hand, a delineated circular shape indicative of Tier 3 sorcery. A backward gust surged forth, dramatically whirling the 57 in stand-cast ratio. A silhouette settled on a tree, commended his swift creation of an enchanted diagram. The killer struck once more, ridiculing the famed sorcerer's apprentice. Due to its nimbleness, Litshade evaded the raging inferno. His digits penetrated the soil. His eyes sparkled intensely. A thundering inferno erupted from his hand-stacked energy incantation. Fiery tempest of timber surged forth as he insisted on revealing the assailant's identity. The woodland ignited, and soaring infernos. He sprinted through the blaze, pondering whether this was retribution. The recollection of that evening emerged once more. Concealed, an individual watched him from the canopy of a tree. The observer commended his swift reasoning. The killer observed that Litshade skillfully employed pyromancy to shield against being followed. Regrettably, the employer had foreseen his capabilities. Multiple assassins had been contracted, and Litshade's shoulder bled incessantly. The killer discarded a wig with a sneer, proclaiming that this was the periphery of Chenlin, where teleportation sorcery remained unnoticed. No one would detect his absence. He was already encircled. In another location, Pabuki looked serenely into the shadowy evening. Lewin expressed his admiration for the prolonged period of anticipation. A magical circle materialized in the air as a silhouette shimmered inside, and Jule referred to him as. Sulin traversed the gateway, and Jule greeted his arrival warmly. She observed his premature arrival and inquired of Pabuki whether his information regarding Chenlin was precise. Pabuki informed his illustrious sovereign, the fabled sorcerer, that developments were occurring more swiftly than anticipated, yet remained fundamentally precise. Suhelan abruptly exclaimed the name Starling, Xiao Huluo Stiff. She commanded the law enforcement sorcerer team to pursue, and the elder complied immediately. Suhelan offered a subtle smile, observing a captivating irregularity emerging around Chenlin Academy as the luminous full moon illuminated the woodland conflict. Litshade seethed with rage as the assassin ridiculed his remarkable power. Simply an ordinary magic scholar. Nevertheless, he endured authority, significantly surpassing his capabilities. She commanded sharply, and another assassin rushed forward with sword at the ready. Under constant bombardment, Litshade had no opportunity remaining to inscribe new magical patterns. Abruptly, he tightened his hand into a fist, and scarlet strands erupted. The crimson ropes entwined them. Their forms were secured firmly. Litshade delivered a powerful blow during the Soul Thread reconnaissance operation. Amu observed the astonishing spectacle transpire. Grasping the opportunity while they were confined, Litshade escaped after securing them and unleashing toxins. However, Amu declined to permit his getaway and pursued him. How could an ordinary pupil possess knowledge of the arts of assassination? She sprang forth from behind with her weapon. Litshade's sight dimmed as crimson liquid erupted in all directions. Amu instructed her comrades to consume the elixir formulated by their covert assassination group. She whispered that his methods of assassination seemed unsettlingly recognizable. Hingley grasped a container of Litshade's blood, signifying the successful completion of the mission, and instructed them to spare him in order to prevent complications near the borders of Chenlin. Anne was otherwise generous with her smiles. She disclosed that a more affluent contender had compensated her to end his existence. In other locations, numerous individuals lashed out at Sidoffin's offspring, branding him as irrational. Their objective was merely to acquire Litshade's blood as a catalyst for an impending curse rune, yet he had escalated the cost of assassination. Camouflaging his extraterrestrial to entice him beyond Chenlin's watchfulness presented the ideal opportunity to eradicate him, Sidoffin's offspring contended. Meany seethed that Chenlin's sorcery could track movements even at the perimeter, and a fatality would reveal them despite his cadaverous disposal scheme. Sidoffin's offspring icily asserted that he never overlooked an opportunity to eliminate dangers, ridiculing her cursed strategy as sluggish and feeble. Regarding his family's prospects, Litshade needed to disappear quickly. In the interim, unusual dark stains emerged within Litshade's heart. He bowed his head in quietude. A voice summoned his name, compelling his eyes to flutter open. Soft moonlight emerged before him, encouraging him to continue. It's displayed as spherical and luminous. He must endure. His gaze sparkles with determination. I comprehend. Litshade nipped his hand, drawing forth blood. The voice intoned softly, present your essence, and he lifted his hand, whispering, mother. The shadows consumed his form, and he welcomed the obscurity without remorse. While the assassins debated their bounties, Anwu derisively remarked that eliminating all three simultaneously would be a mere trifle for her. Terror shimmered as they recognized Zhu Anwu's ulterior motives. Hingley abruptly exclaimed that Litshade was positioned behind them. Luke twirled around. He observed a fellow player cleaved by Litshade in a solitary blow. A chilling jolt at the location. A foreboding atmosphere of shadowy fixation emanated from him. Furious, Hingley surged forward, crying out for retribution for the captain. He charged ahead with dazzling velocity, insisting Litshade forfeit his existence. Litshade elevated his hand. Tranquil, in a flash, the assailant was cut repeatedly. The deputy captain collapsed in an instant. Litshade abruptly materialized in front of him, sword gleaming in the shadows. The keen blade shimmered icily beneath the nocturnal heavens. Anwu hurried in and thwarted his attack with her own sword. She flung the container of blood to a colleague, commanding him to retrieve it. Depart at once, she instructed without delay. Anwu perceived that this adversary was no simple quarry. Scowling at Litshade, she recognized he was exceedingly perilous. In the quiet obscurity, Anwu crouched low, pursuing her quarry. Malicious resolve blazed in her gaze. She traversed, as though navigating the delicate boundary between existence and oblivion. With the blade clutched tightly, she surged ahead. Acceptance was compulsory. Defeat is never a possibility. Like that of a killer's destiny, perpetually just a breath removed from demise. Amu whirled and struck fiercely at Litshade. He evaded her blow with relaxation. Two appendages emerged from Litshade's posterior. He instructed the darkness to envelop Anwu. She flung her blade ahead. Nevertheless, the keen edge was unable to injure him in any way. Anwu sprang into the air to increase the gap. Seizing her blade in mid-flight, she plunged toward Litshade's limb. His injury mended immediately. His gaze radiated an eerie brilliance. Anwu's gaze expanded as perspiration trickled down her face. She unleashed a barrage of unyielding assaults. She abruptly recoiled to preserve a secure distance. Litshade grasped his wounded arm. Upon letting go, the injury had vanished, entirely restored. Anwu became motionless. Was this the fabled force of darkness? She gazed at him as if he were an otherworldly creature. He released a puff of emerald vapor, then propelled ahead at astonishing velocity. Anwu struck, yet he deftly maneuvered to the side. She clenched her jaws, perspiration cascading onto her sword. Litshade elongated his limb in an unnatural manner and splintered her blade. Anwu sealed her lips firmly. This was polished metal. Pushed into a predicament, she opted to shatter conventions and risk her existence to reclaim her skills as an assassin. She initiated the assassin creation method. Litshade observed numerous scarlet avians saturate the heavens, spectral blood Anwu. They flocked frantically around him. Clutching the chains, Anwu scoffed, urging him to shatter her delusion. Although she had departed from the assassin creation organization, she was still capable of employing its prohibited techniques. She encircled Litshade's neck with the chain, instinct for survival taking precedence over everything. Eliminating the objective was her intuition. Mont, the apex, is invariably the critical juncture. Litshade contorted his neck, crimson gaze fixating on Anwu. From the depths of the woods emerged a horrifying shriek, causing Sidifin's offspring to scowl. Mini reassured him that defeat was out of the question, as she had employed a former assassin, an elite construct, for their protection. However, both tensed at an unexpected arrival. A dim silhouette advanced through the woods. Sidifin's offspring identified them alongside Dread, the Shenlin law enforcement magical unit.